Hello to all you lovely brides and grooms out there. I'm Nikita.
And I'm Amelia.
And welcome to Guides to Brides, the wedding podcast.
This brand new podcast will help guide you through your wedding planning, discuss trends and so much more.
Let's get started. Hello again, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of our wedding podcast.
Yes, welcome back and happy Friday.
I love that we record these on a Friday.
Yeah, such a perfect way to end the week. And today we're all working from home and recording from home. So apologies if you do hear any background noises.
Absolutely. And we should say that there is someone else joining us today. Welcome, Sam.
Hello to you both.
Hi Sam, thanks for joining us today. Would you like to tell the listeners a little bit about yourself before we get started?
Yeah, sure. So I've been in the wedding industry for about 15 years now. The first 12 years I was doing wedding photography and planning. And then in 2017 with my business partners, we bought our first wedding venue, which was the Ravenswood. Since that time, we've then gone on to get a few more wedding venues, and we got Crocombe Court, Rushpool Hall, Hackness Grange and Highley Manor. And basically, each of them are very different, but they all follow a similar line, as in being a country house exclusive wedding venue. And they're really fun and they're really great to run. Obviously, now it's a bit tricky, but I just really enjoy it. And I am very passionate about weddings and could talk about weddings all the time.
Thanks, Sam. And I think that intro leads us perfectly into what we will be discussing in this episode. So today we'll be talking all about your wedding venue checklist.
Yes, we'll be going through everything you'll need to do, consider and look for when you're choosing your wedding venue. This is kind of the most important task of wedding planning in the early stages because it's the biggest element that gets ticked off the list.
Yes, and as you've heard, Sam is the perfect person to discuss all of this with. She's been helping couples plan their weddings for years, so knows all the ins and outs along with some insider knowledge.
Just a little bit.
So, if we do this in a practical order, there are certain things you'll need to know and do in preparation for your venue search. So, Sam, do you have any initial recommendations or anything for couples that they might want to consider?
Well, I think the first thing to discuss, with your partner and your family is budget. And I think it's really important, obviously, to work out what budget is available and what budget you are aiming to achieve for your wedding, at which point you can then sort of get an idea of what you would like to spend on your wedding venue. The next thing is to decide what kind of wedding venue you're looking for. There are so many different options out there, and I think it's really important to have a look around and then decide what works for you as a couple. For example, there's barn wedding venues, there's all-inclusive wedding venues that are more like country houses, there's local hotels, town halls are very popular places now that are also licensed. You could have an at-home marquee wedding. You could also have, maybe none of that works for you and you might want to just pop down the registry office and then go to a really lovely restaurant afterwards. It's just a case of working out what style you're looking for. You may not know. That might be part of the fun. So the next thing would be to obviously have a look at, different venues and use different sites, Guides for Brides, obviously, to, find your venues, and just have a look around and see what's there and get an idea of price, because I think that really is the starting point. And most venues are very happy to obviously give you their brochure, so you can have a look. Yeah,
definitely. And you can, like on Guides for Brides, for example, you can send different venues all over the country, wherever you're looking for, to ask them about brochures, to ask them if you can book in a show round, to do all sorts of things. And I think another thing that you could probably consider doing before you start looking for your venue is to prepare your rough guest list. We referred to this in our last episode as being the big list, the list of people that you would invite in an ideal world where budget and capacity weren't an issue.
I call it the A, B and C list.
Yes, and yes, exactly, absolutely. That's exactly how we talked about it in the last episode.
Yeah.
Right? And I think as well, just having a little bit of an open mind. You might think you want something and then be like, oh, actually, no, I don't want that. And you won't realise it until you start actually investigating.
100%.
Yeah, exactly. So when I was looking for wedding venues, I really thought that I wanted a barn wedding, and we went to see a couple of barns, and I don't know, I just felt like it wasn't quite actually what I wanted. And then we ended up going for a venue that was completely different, and actually we fell in love with that. So I don't think you should really tie yourself down to one particular venue type, because, you know, you might see another one and actually prefer it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's where your point about hire types comes in, Sam, isn't it? Because as you were talking about earlier, there are loads of different venues, but also different ways you can hire them.
100%. And I think that is also part of the starting point of searching for your wedding venue for a lot of couples, is they just don't have any idea of what's available. For example,
especially when you never planned one before.
Like, oh no, of course, it's the biggest ask in the whole wide world. It's like, yay, congratulations, you got your wedding, your engagement ring. Now you need to plan a party for 100 people or 50 people or whatever it is. And you know, for some people they jump on it and it's the easiest thing in the whole wide world, but for a lot of people it's quite daunting. And you know, there really is a lot of where do you start, which is also why in lockdown I started the Wedding Planning Hub as just an Instagram and a place to go and get tips and tricks on things. But, you know, I really do also cover things like that we're talking about in here. It's like, how do you start this? And I think when you're looking at venues, it's really a case of also looking for the hidden costs. And this is something that I really, really stress to couples all the time. Is, you know, I've seen it so many times where they download a brochure and it's like, oh, for 50 guests, it's £2,000. And they're like, oh, that's amazing. And then when they actually start to look into it, it's like, oh, but if you want to have the fireplace turned on, it's another £250. And actually that £2,000 doesn't get you canapes, and it doesn't get you, you know, the things that you would be expecting to have in a package.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think actually that's a really good point, because, whereas like dry hire is the case of just hiring a venue, nothing else, maybe they'll bring in staff for the bar, that's probably about it. Whereas you have, as you've mentioned, like packages can go up in price depending on what you want. You know, all-inclusive wedding venues might not be as all-inclusive as you think it is. You might want to ask about those different prices.
100%. And also, which you just touched on as well on the dry hire venues, sometimes, particularly if you're going to like a town hall venue, they'll say to you, you know, we'll run the bar, or you can run the bar, and here's the room. So then the next question is, well, do we get tables and chairs included in that, or do we have to hire our own tables and chairs? You know, the one that gets me all the time is when someone says, oh, we're just going to have a small affair in the garden of our parents' house. And I literally hold my breath, because I know that those numbers go through the roof, because they're just not thinking. It's like, by the time you've put a marquee in, you then need cutlery, crockery, tableware, you know, all the tablecloths, etc. Then you need portaloos most of the time. And not to mention the fact that it gets cold, so then you're going to need heat lamps, and it just...
And generators as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Generators to be able to power it all, and it just absolutely spirals. Now, someone that obviously works in events can look at that very quickly and have an exact figure, and they know what they'll be doing. But for me, it's often like, oh, we're just going to try and do it cheaply and get, you know, be in the garden. And I'm like, oh, there's nothing cheap about that. Unless they have a barn, there's nothing cheap about that. So it's just research. And then it is also thinking about your guests as well. I go back and forwards on this. I always think for the couple, they have to pick what works for them and what's really important for them. But if you are having a church wedding, you need to think about, you know, the sort of timings from the church, from the church to the venue that you're then going to have your reception.
Yeah, that brings us on to that really good point about making sure you know what type of ceremony you want, because if you want your ceremony in the same place as your reception, or all in one venue for the whole day, you're going to have to check whether that venue is licensed. Or if you want to have a church wedding, as you say, you're going to have to work out those timings for how long it takes to get to the venue. I mean, are you going to get married in your local church, or are you going to then get married in a different church, or are you going to get married in your local church and travel an hour to your dream reception venue? Is that something that's
starve
possible?
everyone in the process?
Yeah, and then also you've kind of got the risk then of people might get lost on the way in between the two venues,
which they totally do.
Yeah, and it just delays people getting there. If you choose to have everything all in one place, like I did, because I wanted to avoid all of these issues, then you actually end up spending more time with your guests because they're there already.
People stop. Like, as a photographer, it was my biggest stress was when there was a church wedding and then there was like a large drive to the venue, because what happens is people go, oh, well, we'll just stop at that pub and get a quick drink. And then all of a sudden you're there ready to do the group photos and half the guests are missing. And you've got this tiny window to do these photos and you kind of just go, oh, okay, let's rearrange everything. And they just hadn't left enough time because they had such a long drive between the church and the venue. And these are just the silly little things that people it would never occur to them. They'd be like, oh, well, that's my dream church and that's my dream venue. But that 45 minutes can be the difference between them having a photo with, Granny, or not having that photo.
But I guess at the same time, if that's something that you really want, you can also, if you consider that time and you plan for it, you can have it. It just means you have to be really, really organised. What about wet or cold weather contingency plans? When do you start thinking about that? Because, I mean, as you said, Sam, you might want to have a marquee in your parents' garden, but
yes.
Are 150 of your guests going to fit inside that marquee? Do you plan to have it outside? What do you do if it's wet and cold?
Such a good point. This is England. I don't know where everyone's listening to this on this podcast, but it's like, I think you have to accept the fact that there is a high possibility it will rain on your wedding day. Now, I think most people think, well, in England, when it does rain, it kind of rains for about 45 minutes and then stops. However, there are certain days, and it isn't always April, sometimes it's August, where it torrential rains from morning till night. And
God, don't we know it?
Yeah, don't we know it, exactly, especially on those August days when we're standing there being like, please not today. But the thing is if you've picked a venue that only allows for one room, and this happens with barns, as you just touched on with marquees, where there isn't anywhere, like you can only get married inside or you can only be in that room, then as people are, for example, in a barn, if it's just one big barn with nothing else, you'll have your ceremony in there, then you'll all sort of pile down to the other end where the bar is, while the staff desperately try to take all the chairs away, try to lay it up for your meal. Then you kind of go and have your meal. Then you shuffle back to the bar again while they try to take everything else away. And whilst it can work, it's just not a great experience for your guests. And also at our venues, we try to move people from one room to the next room, to outside, to inside. So they constantly have, every 2 hours, they feel like they're in a different place. And I feel like that really helps to keep the momentum of the day going, and it helps to stop people from getting bored or from being in the same four walls. So that's really something to keep an eye on.
Yeah, and I mean, you can't really plan a marquee at the last minute, can you? I mean, you might be able to go and grab a gazebo from someone's garden, but it's never going to fit 150 people under it if you're going to have to change over a room.
Have you ever seen the photo of the mudslide wedding, which I just think is hilarious? There's a photo or a little video somewhere that I saw like probably about 6 months ago where they'd had a marquee, but they hadn't hired the floor. So they'd had the marquee straight into the grass. It had torrential rained. The floor was a mud bath, and the bridesmaids and the couple just went for it. And the end pictures, they are covered from head to toe in mud.
Oh my goodness.
And they would just had like festival style mud, bombing into this mud, and they just embraced it because I don't think there was anything else you could do. But I remember looking at that picture and being like, how many people don't think that ordering a floor is important? And I was like, probably hundreds.
Yeah, it's one of those things, isn't it? And I can just picture, like, do you want to get married in Glastonbury when it's like completely tipping it down with rain? Probably not. So you would want to make sure you have that floor.
Yeah. Yes, but I don't know if I'd have thought about it. Like, obviously you hope that the marquee company would push you to get the floor. But, if I was cutting costs, I don't think it would ever occur to me that water would come into, I'm blonde for a reason, but like, I don't know if it would have ever occurred to me that water would have come in the underneath of a marquee. But when you see it, you're like, oh gosh, yes, of course.
There are certain venue types that are associated with a higher budget. Obviously, like palaces, to name one of them, castles. Although, you might be surprised, actually. You might be able to find a castle that's within your budget if that's what you're looking for. But I think it's important to remember that while you're investigating your venues, you should always keep your options open in terms of in terms of price, because actually if you're thinking about a wedding for that's £10,000, most couples would spend approximately 40 to 45% of that budget on the venue and catering. So you'd probably know what your budget is, but if your dream venue is just that little bit more or even a little bit less, you don't know until you've researched it. You can actually turn it into something more that you like. So, you might find a barn that you love but can't afford the extra cost of the decor. You could probably do a lot of that yourself. I mean, DIY weddings are very popular at the moment.
I know a couple, and they basically had their hearts set on this dream venue. But in order to have that venue, they had to reduce their guest list. And that for them was more important. It was more important for them to have, their immediate family and their dream wedding venue that was, it was stunning, but it was on the higher end expensive level, and that was what they wanted. And, I think there were a few people that were a little bit hurt on the side because they were like, oh, we would have wanted to go to that wedding. But at the end of the day, that's what the couple wanted. And they had a perfect wedding. And for them, they have such amazing memories of their wedding. And that was what they wanted. And when you really asked them, they were like, we just didn't want 100 people staring at us. We just wanted that much more intimate.
Fair enough.
Yeah, intimate wedding. And I was like, okay, I understand that. And it's so personal. You have to do what's right for you.
Yeah. And I mean, we touched on this last time, didn't we, Amelia? Like,
we did, yeah. It's like the quality over quantity thing.
Yes. Yeah, and sometimes when you are having to reduce the guest list, it would be like if you want more guests, you probably have to compromise on the quality. If you want less guests, you can probably up the quality. It's as you say, a completely personal decision.
100%. Particularly, if you want to have that sort of fine dining 6 courses, that kind of experience. Well, you're not. Well, some couples absolutely are, but you're not necessarily going to do that for 250 people. Whereas, but then you can do it another way. You can also find a venue where you could have that absolutely intimate, smaller numbers in the day, and then they give you the keys to the big ballroom in the evening, and you can then invite all of those additional people that you weren't able to have for the meal.
Yeah, absolutely.
So there's always ways to look at it, different ways to look at it.
Yeah, as we keep saying in these podcasts, it's your wedding. Do what you want to do.
Totally.
It's your money as well. Like, if you want to spend it on a luxury venue and only have 20 guests, go for it. Like, I think what we've learned this year from all those micro weddings is that they can be just as special. And you can up the luxury. Yeah, which is the bonus.
And no one that's had the micro weddings, from my experience, there may be some, but from everything I've seen, particularly on my Instagram and on the venues' Instagrams and the ones we've had at our venues, is very much you know, they have their micro wedding, they've had their 15 people, 30 people, or we like to call it intimate wedding. And, you know, they've had the intention, some of them, of like, oh, we'll do this again next year. And then, you know, we get a phone call. Yeah, we get a phone call like 6 weeks later being like, oh, do you know what? We're married. Like, it was so perfect. It was so amazing. We loved it so much. And actually now we're married and we don't feel the need to do this again. We might have a big party.
Absolutely.
But like in terms of like getting married, they're like, no, we got married. Like that was amazing.
Yeah, and I think that's what people forget, isn't it? That is part of it is about actually getting the marriage done.
Yeah,
that's
quite an
a
important
very
part.
special thing. Yeah.
I think that leads us on quite nicely to, you know, where you can actually look for inspiration for your wedding, whether you want, you know, a big venue, lots of people, or you do want something smaller and more intimate.
Well, I mean, I think Guides for Brides is perfect. You can just go to the website and you can search and find a number of different venues quite quickly and very easy to, like you said earlier, you know, get the information as to how much it costs. And, you know, it's quite a good place to find lots of venues in your area. You know, and then obviously there's a lot of couples, the first thing they do is they start a Pinterest board because they're, you know, going for inspiration. Yes.
So I had mine since I was like 12, so
Yeah.
Okay, I wasn't going to say that, but yes, I think we may all have done that.
Yeah. And I think it's a great place to not only look for like venue inspiration, but it gets you an idea of like your overall look and feel of your wedding, and that actually sometimes helps you to inform the venue decision.
1,000%. No, you're totally right, because if you get that idea of, if you fall in love with a style on Pinterest, you know, that style may be, you know, a vintage style or a botanical or anything, whatever that may be. If you were then had, you know, a vision of your venue being a certain way, you may then look at that style and look at the venue and be like, oh, hey, hold on, this is not going to match. And I also say the same for wedding dresses. Like, do not buy your wedding dress until you've nailed your venue. Because
I think once you've got the right vibe that you want, then you can match a venue to it, and then actually, you know, take your Pinterest board round to all your suppliers and be like, look, this is what I want, this kind of feel. Can you recreate it?
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Like bringing your Pinterest board round with you when you go and see your venue, and just sort of saying to them like, I love this fairy light wall. Is this something that's possible to do here? How much is that going to cost me? Because I can't do it myself. You know, it helps you to ask the right questions.
But also that, exactly what you just said there was perfect, because that helps you find the restrictions. If your venue had a wedding the day before, they may say to you, you only have a 2-hour window in the morning to set up, in which case you're either getting a venue decorator in to do it, or you know that the venue has to be so beautiful or your style that you don't actually have to add that much to it, and then you're just bringing the boxes for the centerpieces and, you know, a few bits to go around the venue, but you're not giving the venue a complete overhaul in 2 hours. But the most important part of that is to find out what happens at the end of the night, because I've seen, you know, in my photography days, I've seen brides who at the end of the night have been trying to get up a ladder, half cut, let's say, trying to take decoration down, because the venue is like, you've got 1 hour to get everything out, and the family is scrambling around, and, you know, you kind of take a look and like, oh gosh, this is, you know, an absolute nightmare, because they've been told everyone has to leave at 11 and by 12 all the decor has to be out. And of course no one wants to do that at the end of their wedding.
No, because in their heads they have this idea of, you know, a nice sparkler send-off or something, and then actually, you know, there's a lot of work at the end of the day if you are doing it DIY.
Yes, and let's be honest, some couples can't stand properly at the end of their wedding.
Yeah, I mean,
sore feet.
Yeah,
we'll take that.
Feet, that's the So now let's move on to that process of finding a venue and choosing the best one for you. I mean, again, Sam, you are very much the expert on this, and you probably do this every single day of your life. I mean, I can't imagine the amount of times you've done this.
Many times I've shown people around venues and been like, this is, you know, obviously I'm going to say all of my venues are the best venues in the world. However, I actually really struggled to find my venue in the beginning, and I did end up, whilst I was engaged, that was when we then bought our wedding venue, the first one, and that is where I went on to get married, because I obviously fell in love with it. But I'm not going to lie, I found the whole process really overwhelming in the beginning, and it was that kind of like, oh, there's so much choice. And then I would get these brochures through, and they had all these, add this for £5 and add this for £3. And I was like, I don't have the headspace to create a spreadsheet and mathematically work this out. But I do think now there are, I think people have wised up to that and gotten a bit better with their brochures and a bit better with their pricing. So I feel like when you do actually arrive at the venue, like the first thing to do is like maybe download like 20 brochures, have a good look at everything, nail it down to your favorite 5. And then from those favorite 5, call up, get an appointment. I think from the moment you're emailing or calling, that is when you are assessing the venue. Do they email you back quickly? Was it easy to get their brochure? Did they answer the phone when you called them? If they didn't answer the phone, was there an answer phone service? Did they call you back the next day? Like, obviously, I think 24 hours is acceptable, because they may be doing a venue, particularly if they're the type of venue that, is family run, because some barn venues are family run. You have to give them a bit of time. But it's how's the correspondence in the beginning? Then when you get to the venue for the tour, it's very much like, how do you feel? Like when you get to that part where it's like, well, this is where you'll walk down the aisle. Can you envision yourself walking down the aisle? When it gets to this is where you'll have your photos. Can you see like, oh, we could have this pretty photo over there?
Yeah, definitely. It's a bit like buying a house. If you're
it's totally like buying a house.
Like, yes, I'm going to put my TV here and my sofa here.
Totally. And if it doesn't fit your feng shui, then it doesn't fit your feng shui. I do also think as well, though, the person giving you the tour is a very good indicator of the venue. And, if that person's really caring, if they're really excited for your wedding, if they're there to listen to you, then that's a really good sign. I've seen it so many times. I've heard it so many times from couples that say, oh, well, we just went to this venue, and, the person giving us a tour basically gave us a 5-minute tour and was like, that's where the ceremony is. That's where the, you'd have your 3-course meal, and here's outside where you take some pictures. If you want to have a look around, go for it. I've got another appointment now. Let me know what you think, type thing, and went off and left them. And they just felt, it's a lot of money. It's a lot of money. Yeah. And you have to feel like that person, like everything, the venue aside, like I do know people that have gotten married in a venue that wasn't the venue that they loved, but they felt like that was the venue that was going to look after them the best.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, if you do have any problems or issues that come up, you want to know that there is someone there that actually is willing to help you and wants you to have the best day of your life.
And I mean, you can also translate that into like a photographer as well, couldn't you? So would you book your wedding photographer if you didn't click with them? Like, why would you book that venue if you don't feel like you're going to be looked after?
Yeah, and the photographer is going to be by your side the whole day. You have to like them. Like when they turn around to you and be like, kiss each other, you don't want to be like, oh, please stop telling me to do that. Like you want to be in the moment and really excited. And yeah, it's the same for your venue. And also you have to be able to feel like you can communicate to your venue. Like our policy at our venues is no question is too stupid. Like if you think it, ask it, even if you think it's ridiculous. And also you can ask the same question 100 times. If you ask it 101 times, we might tell you to go back and read the previous email. But we're never going to send you an email that says, well, we've already answered that question, read the email. Because it's just so much information. So it's like we're happy to keep repeating ourselves and we're happy to be there and answer the questions. And you need to ask that, like, okay, well, if I book with you, do I get to come back and have a tour with my photographer? Do I get a final details meeting with you? Am I able to come to the venue? When am I allowed to come to the venue to measure things? Or if I want to decide where to put my photo booth, can I come and have another look round? Like, what is your policy on this? And
I think it's a really good idea to actually, just have a really big list of every single question you can think of. Yeah. So that when you actually either emailing the venue or going to see them in person, that you've got that list, have a pen with you so you can actually write down the answers. and then
so many people do it.
all.
Like, don't be embarrassed to do it. So many people do it. Like, it's
I did
really
it.
funny. Yeah, totally. It's really funny. Like, people turn up and you're like, so do you have any questions? And they literally crack open the book and you're like, okay, let's go. Let me see how many of these I can get through, you know?
Let's talk about creating that sort of like shortlist of venues. So, I mean, my recommendation for couples out there now would be to do the search, do the research, go on somewhere like Guides for Brides and have a look at all the venues that are at your disposal. Send out those inquiries, see what information comes back, and then put it into a big like spreadsheet or, you know, folder, however you want to work. And then sort of identify your favourites. Read the reviews, because the reviews are going to be like essential. Add links to it, write pros and cons, ask for more information.
Yeah, but I think that's exactly right. It's you know, what differentiates one beautiful house from another beautiful house, or one beautiful barns. I mean, when barns first started, they were literally cow sheds, and I'm not even joking. It was like a farmer had a cow shed and was like, hey, I've just taken the cows out, we've cleaned the floor, but you can come and get married here. And that's how barns started. But now they've evolved into incredible, beautiful structures. You know, and I think some of the barns are just as stunning as some of the stately homes. So, you know, it is just I think it's just, you kind of have to, I think price point is the first one, like whittle it down on price point, like what does actually fit in your budget or just about fit in your budget. And then what can accommodate numbers. It's always the first question is numbers. There's no point in going to look at a venue that can't accommodate your numbers. The second thing is when you're getting, like when you're making that decision, is check dates. You know, it's like do you want to go, my consultants are going to kill me for saying this, but do you want to go and look at a venue that doesn't have your date? Because they will be like, yes,
or an approximate date. Like, even if you say, oh, do you have any Saturdays in the summer? Like, even if it's that, do you want to go see them if you don't? If they don't have those? But
they might not have any Saturdays in summer, in which case that's really important to get clear. You know, I joke about my consultants, but they do actually, that is what they like to sort of figure out with people, is like, they don't want someone to come, they don't want to waste their time either and do an hour's tour with them and then find out that the only date they're willing to get married is this date. And you're like, well, I already have a wedding on that date. And then they're like, well, you know, it's a waste of everybody's time.
Yeah. But I think on the couple's perspective as well, that if there is a venue that they really love the look of and the date isn't available that they want, actually, if they don't rule that out and still go and see it, they might find actually they can compromise another date that they weren't originally planning, so they can still have that venue.
And that is 1,000% correct. And that is where I do think you also do need to keep in mind, because if a venue doesn't have any Saturdays, that means it is a very popular venue, which generally means it's a very good venue. And I had a really funny discussion with a gentleman on the Wedding Planning Hub. I'd posted something in the Facebook group. I'd posted something about, you know, when's everyone getting married, and we're having a good old chit chat. And he came back saying that he was looking to have 150 people, but couldn't decide whether to get married in May or around Christmas, because he wanted a Christmas themed wedding, but with that many guests, he felt he should have it in May. And I was like, you should try and have it in May with that many guests, because you don't want them all to be stuck inside. That's a lot of guests to have inside. And I was like, but there's nothing wrong with having a Christmas theme in May. You just have to stylize it a little bit different. Anyway, we had this whole back and forwards, and I sent him pictures and everything. And now he's like, oh, we're going to hang snowflakes from the ceiling and, you know, have this sort of navy and gold theme going through it. And actually,
that's going to be beautiful. That's such a good color scheme.
It's going to be incredible. You know, and it just because it's spring doesn't mean you have to have spring colours, and just because it's winter doesn't mean you have to have winter colours. Like, you can do anything you want to.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. And I mean, I think that leads nicely on to how to shortlist your favourites, because, you know, you might have like a list. Your long list could include 20 venues. So you've done all of this pros and cons. You've managed to cut it down. So our recommendation is about 5 on your shortlist.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, and then getting in touch with those. I mean, if it's 6, I mean, it's not going to matter. But, you know, just reaching out, having conversations, going on a tour, even at the moment, a virtual tour. And, you know, it's just getting down to the nitty gritty. Because as long as you know the difference between your needs versus your wants, you can probably compromise on the wants a little bit. And as long as you're clear on, like, every single one of those venues that you've shortlisted have got everything you need, then it should be not an easy decision, but something that is a little bit less of a stressful thing to decide on.
I think you'll connect as well. I think if you shortlist it down to 5, I think that's a great number. I actually think the national average is 3.
Wow.
People shortlist it down to 3 that they're actually going to visit. That said, I've met someone that's visited 20. You know, It really depends what you're into. You know, and again, there's no right or wrong way to do that. But I think I do sometimes think that people do. They whittle it down to 5, and they might even go and look at the first 2 of those and fall in love with the second one, and then go, actually, we don't need to see anything else. This is what we want to see. This is where we want to get married. Or they might go and see all of them, because they all do have a similar package, similar price structure, etc. And then it's just down to which one is the one that gave you that emotional connection that makes you want to get married at that venue.
Sure.
Plus, it's quite fun going to look at venues, I think.
Yeah.
It is, yeah. When you finally decided on the one that you really want to book for your wedding day, then you actually need to put down a deposit to hold your date.
Especially if it's the financials.
Yeah, especially if it's a very popular venue. You know, you want to get that deposit in so that no one else nabs your date.
100%. And that is really key. I think if you do look at a venue and you think, actually, do you know what, this is possibly the one, there's nothing wrong with asking them to put a provisional down for you. And most venues will do that. They'll allow you to have a week or 3 days or whatever it is that they give you to then go away and try and get into the other venues, you know, quickly. I do think it's important, if you're looking at venues, to try and look at them across 2 weekends, because if you do find a venue you love, you want to put that provisional down, you're more than likely able to let them keep that provisional until you've seen all of the venues. At which point you then want to go back and, you know, they'll have saved your date and then you will be paying your deposit. Now, every venue is different. There isn't a right or wrong way to, you know, to pay that deposit. I think it's very important to get the terms and conditions so that you've had a look through the terms and conditions and you understand what you are signing up for. Deposits are normally non-refundable. And you kind of, well, they're often not called deposits, they're called booking fees, and that makes them non-refundable. Obviously, if something goes wrong, most venues are very happy to discuss that, and actually they will, you know, work something out with you. But you do need to, like, when you are paying that deposit, or booking fee, you are committing to that venue.
And if you actually go ahead with that venue, they then take that deposit out of your final payments?
Yes, 100%. That deposit is part of, or booking fee is part of your full balance. And they normally will have something whereby, you know, 6 months before your wedding, or depending on the timeline to your wedding, you will pay another chunk towards your wedding, which is quite good because it means that by the time you actually get to the final numbers and going, these are my final numbers, and you get your final bill, you've actually already paid half of it. So you're not approaching you know, the day of the wedding and all of a sudden you have to pay out all this money to all these different people, that suppliers, as well as everything towards the venue. Quite a lot of venues will obviously also take the full balance beforehand if you wanted to. Just you have to sort of leave a little bit of space if your numbers change. And some venues will also allow you to pay monthly should you wish to do that. But you do need to really understand that by the day you walk in to have that wedding, you have to have your account fully settled, because they will not put the wedding on unless you have fully paid for it. There's no, oh, well, we'll pay it monthly after the wedding. It doesn't work like that.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think actually that actually links nicely back to that point about knowing what your budget is and knowing what you can afford before you start looking, because as long as you've worked it out and done the maths beforehand, even if you go slightly over budget, you need to know how much, you know, where's your buffer, what is the buffer zone, so that you know, like, oh, this venue is gonna be within the budget, but you know there might be that one extra cost, like you say, lighting the fire that you really wanted to have. Does your buffer cover that? All that sort of stuff. I think there'll be some other couples out there who, especially right now, will be feeling a little bit nervous about putting a deposit or a booking fee down on a venue because of COVID. How does your venue approach that worry?
So there's two things that we're doing right now. We were actually one of the first venues to start doing like Zoom tours. As soon as this hit, I very, very quickly, you know, we pieced things together with photos and everything so that the consultants were able to do really good online tours with people. You know, we also had a video made in one of the venues, like, funnily enough, we just had it finished just before this happened, and we were able to use that to tour. And
that's really good.
So really lucky. And then I've also been saying, you know, to other venues, like, hey, come on, you guys need to do this too, because, you know, I want everyone to win out of this. I want all venues to come out of COVID, you know, still standing, doing well. And we have been so fortunate in the sense that this year we've actually booked our highest ever weddings. And
wow,
I think
that's actually really good out of this year.
Yeah, it just shows that people are still excited. They still want to get married. And what we're doing is we've been doing the Zoom tours, and we say, look, we'll do the Zoom tour. We'll take a reduced deposit. And when you come to visit the venue, you can pay the balance. And if you come to visit the venue and suddenly decide, no, actually, this isn't the right venue for me, that's okay. And we will refund you your initial deposit. And you have that one day to basically make that decision, because it is like, we want the wedding industry to continue. We want people to be able to get married. We want the venues to be supported. We want the suppliers to be supported. And I think that's a very good way of doing it, is it gives people the safety to know that they can put a deposit down and then they can visit the venue and see it in person. And if it is still everything that they thought it was going to be, fantastic. And if it isn't, well, that's not a problem, and we just nicely part ways and wish them well. So giving away my trade secrets now, but I think that's
well, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. I think that's a really nice way to do it. You know, obviously I'm hoping that we come through this time period not too long now.
I think we were all hopeful that it's like going to only be in the next sort of few months that things start to wind up again, rather than keep going in back and forth in these lockdowns.
Absolutely, but we've had a lot of inquiries for 2025, and I've had to turn around and just be like, stop now. Like, we understand you want to be careful and cautious, but you know, a 5-year, that's very rare. You hear of people doing 5-year planning, and I just think that you'll get bored.
It's like a film.
Yeah, it's just too long. It's too long. It's like, you know, I think as long as your venue is a well-established venue with a good reputation, you know, and actually a good indication is if they do have quite a lot of weddings, you know, the venues will be fine. And I think it is, you know, obviously you can ask the venue, what is their COVID policy? How do they feel? What, you know, what's happens? You know, should anything happen again in the future? But I think there is confidence in booking now, and I think it's a good sign. And I think so many people got engaged at Christmas, and they're just excited, and they're planning, and they want to embrace wedding planning. Oh, I will just say one thing I saw today on Instagram stories that someone tagged me in that I just thought was so sad is a lot of the wedding magazines have stopped printing. And they stopped printing during COVID because people weren't going out buying the wedding magazines, and they flipped to online, and they probably will start printing again. But she was saying she just got engaged at Christmas, and she's so excited to look at wedding magazines, and all of a sudden there aren't any.
It's like that Friends episode where like Rachel brings all the magazines into the cafe for Monica, and she's like, I just had to stop and buy these wedding magazines for you, even though Monica's not engaged yet. It's just It's just one of those
may have
things you
all done
think
that
of.
too. Yeah, I mean, I think that is part of the fun, is getting engaged and suddenly getting a bunch of magazines and being able to look at them. But I do feel that that's where then, you know, the strength of companies like yours comes into play, because then it's like people are able to then turn online and find great suppliers and, you know, good information about weddings and listen to this podcast, obviously.
Obviously. You know, as you said, every venue's booking process is different. Do you have any advice for couples on how they approach the difficult questions about booking and questions about their terms and conditions, especially if they're not certain about a terms and condition, like a clause in the terms and conditions?
Yes, communicate. There's nothing wrong with communicating, and you have to be able to know you can freely communicate to your venue. So if you see something you don't like in the terms and conditions, knock yourself out, give them a call, have a chat through it. There may be a very simple explanation. For example, we don't allow fireworks in any of our venues, and it's because most of our venues are situated near farmland. And, you know, that for us, some people, that's a deal breaker. They won't book a venue because they want to have fireworks, and that's completely okay. Occasionally, sometimes it's something in the terms and conditions that actually can be changed, and you could phone up and say, oh, I'm not really sure about this point, and it's a case of, well, it's been put in as a blanket terms and conditions. For example, a bouncy castle, like it may say in the terms and conditions you can't have a bouncy castle. Now that might be because the venue doesn't want to have a bouncy castle every day of the year, because kids get very excited, makes lots of noise, might make the neighbours upset. But you know what, once in a while, actually, they would agree to it. So you may be the once in a while. So I do think it's important to always question things, especially also if something doesn't quite make sense.
Or if you just don't understand. Like,
of
if it's
course.
just something that you're not, like, sometimes the jargon in these terms and conditions can be quite confusing. So just reach out to them and ask them what it means. Like, it's not, as you say, no question is too stupid.
There's nothing wrong in asking anything of your venue. You're giving them a lot of money. It's the biggest expense on your wedding. Well, in most cases, some people's dresses are more, but you know, it is the biggest expense of your wedding, and you should be able to ask anything you want, whenever you want, and feel comfortable doing so. The only thing I would like to remind everybody is that the person on the other end of your questions is human, and you know, if there is anything that is happening with your wedding or something you would like to communicate, then, you know, just read your emails back, and maybe a phone call might be better, you know, because everyone likes to receive nice emails.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think actually adding on to what you just said there, I mean, if you're planning right now when this podcast comes out, you know, a lot of your venue staff may be on flexi furlough, so give them a few days grace. Like, don't stress if you haven't heard from them, but there will generally always be someone at the other end of the phone to answer it, or at least return your call. But yeah, it's just worth considering. Right now it's a little bit difficult, but you know, that should hopefully end in April. So, you know, we hope it will come back to normal.
So leading on from like terms and conditions and things, you know, what would you advise to couples who are maybe feeling a little bit uncomfortable about the prices and things? Again, my consultants will probably not be best pleased with me saying this, but if you don't ask, you don't get. I think there's always a time to ask a question. So for example, our minimum numbers in our venue sometimes is 40, and we generally tend to, obviously, current situation aside, we generally don't tend to do weddings under 40. However, if someone asks and says, look, I'm really looking to have a wedding for 25, I love your venue, then we're like, great, how does Tuesday sound for you? Because funnily enough, we do weddings 7 days a week in the summer, but outside the summer period, not many people get married on Tuesday. They're quite happy to get married on Monday and Wednesday, but Tuesdays, they just don't. So obviously, I'd rather have a wedding than not have a wedding. And then sometimes as well, someone can come back and say, oh, well, we're really looking at doing this, but in order to have your venue, you know, we are struggling with the price of the rooms, or we're struggling with this, or we're struggling with that. And, you know, there's nothing wrong with asking, is there something you can do to help that?
the venue may turn around and say, no, there's nothing we can do. That is the set price. We're really popular right now. There's 5 people after your date and they're all willing to pay the set price, in which case, fine. Or they may turn around and say, yes, actually, do you know what? We think you're a great couple. We really enjoyed showing you around. And actually, we're already throwing the honeymoon suite in, but we'll also throw in, your either both sets of parents' bedrooms as well. Or if you pay today, we'll put a little bit behind the bar, or we'll reduce it by £500 or something. I think everything is flexible. Obviously, it depends who you're dealing with. If you're dealing with a big corporate company, that's part of a big chain of hotels, there may not be much maneuverability on it, but they can often throw in something or give you a little discount somewhere. But I do think it very much depends on when you're booking, how you're booking, and when you're hoping to get married. I think if you're trying to get married in 4 years' time, then no, it's not very likely. I think if you're in January and you're talking about getting married that July, I think you've got quite a good place to start bargaining.
My husband is quite cheeky and he's an accountant, so he likes to talk money.
I bet you didn't go over budget.
Oh no, he got us a very good discount because he was cheeky, but he did ask, is there anything that you can maybe reduce for us or, throw in extra? Because we were getting married, I think in about 6 months' time by that point. So we had quite a short engagement. So, and they gave us like some free canapes and things included. So, as you say, if you don't ask, you don't get.
Sam, thank you so much for joining us today. Everything that you've said has been super insightful, and I'm sure it's going to help so many couples out there, especially when they're looking for their venue right now. It's very difficult, isn't it? It's a difficult decision.
It's a huge decision, and thank you so much for having me. I've really, really enjoyed it.
Yeah, it's been lovely having you on, Sam. Thanks so much for being our very first guest.
Yay!
And of course, as always, we've covered quite a bit in this episode, so you will be able to find all the relevant links and information in the show notes and in this episode's blog. Just head over to guidesforbrides.co.uk/podcasts.
And you can also follow Sam's wedding planning Instagram at The Wedding Planning Hub. We'll definitely mention it in the show notes as well. And you can learn more about Sam's venues on Guides for Brides too. The links to their listings will all be in the show notes.
We'll chat to you all again in a couple of weeks where we'll be discussing the key wedding suppliers for your day and the general planning timeline.
For now, please follow at Guides for Brides on social media. And if you haven't already, please do leave us a review so that other couples can easily find us as well.
Thanks again for listening. Chat to you soon.
Bye.
Bye.